Today is April 1st. The industrial carbon tax went up, alcohol taxes went up, politicians got a raise. But the story that's flying under the radar are the three new immigration policies that also came into effect today that you need to hear about. My name is Nico Lagan, and I'm too conservative for the conservatives. My co host, Rob Ambrose, not woke enough for the liberals. We are the political orphans. As you can tell, I am alone today. My co host is not here. So, lucky for you, unlucky for you. It depends how you see it. But one thing is for sure, we're going to do a couple of deep dives today. First, we talk about the Indian nurses that are coming to work in Canada. We are then going to speak about the new immigration changes that happened today. And at 7:30, we are joined by independent journalist Jeremy Hammond to speak about the war in Iran. So quite the show that we have for you guys. And we're going to get started. But before we do, my cross is flashing. The first time I see that. Maybe it has something to tell me. Why is my cross flashing? There we go. Now we're good to go. Okay, let's focus. Let's focus here. So we're going to talk about a story that went viral. I spoke about it today on my social medias. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but this is a big deal, supposedly. It's a big deal, actually. I agree that it's a very, very big deal, but it's something that I had no idea was going on until today. So let me bring up an article that appeared in CTV News right here. Ba-boom. So here is a CTV News article stating that first graduates from India Canada nursing program expected to begin work in the fall. And yes, you heard that right. First graduate from India/Canada nursing program expected to work or to begin work in the fall. And as you go through, they have a nice video to show you the graduates. And as you start reading through the article, it kind of explains to you what it is, what it's about. And I went out there, I've done a lot of research. Like, you guys know I do this all the time. I absolutely love doing research and getting the facts, but I just wanted to show you the article that started it all before we go into it, because the numbers are very freaking interesting. Like, you're going to see that this is very, very, very interesting. And they're selling this as a success story. If you look everywhere, this is a massive success story. This is something that we should be proud of somehow. But let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about the what, actually, before we touch on the facts, because there were some very interesting questions that I had to ask when I went through the article and I started digging into the information behind the article. So the first part that we all have to understand is that the program was created in part because of an ongoing nursing shortage in New Brunswick. So this is a program in New Brunswick. It's a partnership between the University of New Brunswick and MAHE. That is, as you will see, this is a university in India where students are trained to follow a Canadian aligned curriculum. And upon completing their degree, they receive a bachelor degree from the Manipal, Manipal, Manipal. It's the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. So they receive a bachelor from there and a bachelor of nursing degree from the University of New Brunswick while studying in India. So let that sink in for a second. We now have a program in India that will give you a double bachelor, a bachelor of nursing in India and an equivalent, something that is accepted here in Canada, a bachelor of nursing in Canada and in collaboration with the University of New Brunswick. And this all started because the New Brunswick government back in 2022, if my memory serves me right, challenged the University of New Brunswick to fill staffing gaps in the healthcare system. Their goal is to bring in 100 Indian registered nurse to New Brunswick before 2025. And as you can see, we're seeing the new graduates starting right now. That means it's a 4-year program. That means they started back in 2022. So their goal is to have 100 of them here in Canada between 2025 and 2026. The new pilot that we are talking about right now is 25 candidates. After completing their studies in India, the students are going to come to New Brunswick for 6 weeks practicum at the Dr. Everett Chalmers Regional Hospital and a Shanix long-term care home, where they will write the National Council licensure examination for registered nurse to earn their Canadian license. Upon passing the exam, these graduates will seamlessly enter Canada's healthcare system without waiting for credentials. So basically, they are trained in India on a curriculum that is Canadian. They automatically, by graduating, they automatically get a bachelor here in Canada. And upon graduating, they come here to Canada for a 6-week practicum to then write their exam, their National Council licensure examination for registered nurses. So that's the story. That's what they're selling you as a success story. But let's look about what's really happening here, what I call the why. So why is this happening? Why do we need? Why do they think? Why are they telling us? Let me rephrase that. Why are they telling us that we need Indian nurses in Canada? Because guess what? Canada has a nurse shortage. If we go back to the CTV article that I showed you earlier, and I quote, if we look at our province, talking about New Brunswick, there's 10 more clinics that are going to need nurses. So there's always going to be a need, said Dr. Lorna Butler, University of New Brunswick's Dean of Nursing and one of the founders of the program. So we're talking about training domestically takes years. And India has a large supply of English-speaking nurses. That is the reason they're talking about Indian nurses, because they have a large supply of English-speaking nurses. In that same article, the CTV News article, back in India, only about 50% of the hospitals are doing all the documentation stuff through a computer. All the other documentations are by written notes. And I'm mentioning this because it's going to be very important in a few minutes. This is Joseph, one of the candidates of the program. So I guess here, all the documentation is done through a computer. So that's also a very different thing to us. This is just to put it into perspective. I want you guys to, obviously, most of you guys understand this, but I want the people that are new to this show to understand that India is a third world country. She just said, one of the students through that program is saying that 50% of the hospitals are doing all their documentation stuff through computer. This is quoted. This is not me putting words together to kind of say what she said. No, I'm not paraphrasing here. Those are her words. Back in India, only about 50% of the hospitals are doing all the documentation stuff. That's some very high level vocabulary there. Documentation stuff through a computer. The other 50% is done by notes, by hand. So tell me, this is the type of place you trust the system? I don't know for you, but that doesn't sound trustworthy to me. So here's the truth. Who's paying for this pilot project? The tuition fee paid by Indian students at Manipal for this program is approximately 700,000 Indian rupees, which converts to roughly 11 to 12,000 Canadian for the full 4-year program. As per ResearchGate.net, the Government of New Brunswick Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labor is funding the Canadian side of this project. But to put it into perspective, so $11,000 to $12,000 for a 4-year course is what it costs Indians to become a nurse. To put it into perspective, in Canada, the same nursing program costs between $40,000 and $80,000. So basically, Indian nurses are getting a job in Canada and obviously are fast tracked through our immigration system at a fraction of the cost that a Canadian needs to pay in order to obtain those same certifications. I don't know if you remember this, but when Carney was in India back in February this year, he launched the China India Talent and Innovation Strategy that includes $25 million in funding for more than 274 scholarship for Indian students in Canada, administered through the University of Toronto. It's also stipulated that he signed agreements with either 13 or 17, I believe it was 13 university in India. So we're basically setting up a pipeline between India and Canada. Not only are taxpayers' money paying for this, we just said 25 million for 274 candidates. I should have calculated this. What's that number? Now I need to know. So 200, what did I say? 274, so 25 million. 25 million divided by 274. Oh, Jesus. So 25 million divided by 274, my apologies. It's 91 grand, just over $91,000 per students. And this is our taxpayers' money. I just told you that it costs between $40,000 to $80,000 in order to train nurses for a 4-year bachelor degree. Why the fuck are we giving that money to Indians instead of giving it to nurses here? Why? Like, this is a question we all need to ask ourselves. Why are Canadians, why are taxpayers giving $25 million to 274 scholarships at the cost of $91,000 a pop when we could train nurses right here in Canada for less than that price, for almost half? 40 to 80 is what it costs for a 4-year, $40,000 to $80,000. And yes, one thing to mention, I'm sure I mentioned it, but I'm going to repeat it. This is a program with 25 students. So it's a pilot program with 25 students between the Mahi University in India and the New Brunswick University here in Canada. But how long do you think it's going to take before this become a federal program, before Canada does that pipeline federally, starts importing more and more and more Indians to Canada? So now we have some of the facts. We understand the story they're trying to sell us. Then we start to see what the actual story is. But here are the questions that we all have to ask ourselves. And obviously, people out there are not asking those questions. You'll never hear mainstream media ask those questions. But here are the questions that I ask myself as I'm reading this article and I'm starting to understand what that program is all about. I'm like, okay, there's some questions that need to be answered. First, where are those students going to take the National Council licensure examination for registered nurses? Because remember, they're in India. They're not here in Canada. And the reason I mentioned what I said earlier about 50% of hospital stuff is still done by notes. That's why I brought this up, because I've never talked about this on the show, but I've done a lot of certifications over the years. Like, I've mentioned that I'm a sales engineer by trade, but to most people, they don't understand what that means. I was the only guy in my team that was not an engineer. I literally have, I dropped out of high school. I was 15 years old, went back to school in my 20s, got a high school equivalency and became a computer technician. Within 9 years, I was selling $1 million solutions as a sales engineer, as the only non-engineer in a team of engineers. So this is kind of my story fast. So you can imagine that I've done a lot of courses outside of the education system, the standard education system because I needed to do certifications on technology that is always evolving. So I got tested by some of the biggest companies out there to make sure that I understood their products, that I understood what they were selling, the equipment that they were selling, so that I could fucking configure it, sell it to the customer, and make sure that her solution matched their needs. So I understand what it is to be tested remotely. And that's why I'm mentioning the 50% of notes in the hospitals. The 50% of information is still passed through notes in the hospitals. It's not even through the computer. That's why I'm mentioning it, because as per the program, they are taking the National Council licensure examination for registered nerd exam in India. They are doing it through a company called Pearson VUE, which I have taken exams at Pearson VUEs in the past. Like, imagine that they are a third-party center where you show up, there's computers, they have the pre-program computers that you need for certain certification. Let's say Cisco network is something. I worked in networking, not meeting people, but passing information through massive systems. This is one of the places that you can go to get those exams. And just to break it down for you guys, you show up there with a ID. You have an idea, you identify who you are, you pre-registered for the exam that you want to pass, you pay a fee, a couple $100 for the exam, you prove your ID, and that's it. You're going to go sit down at a computer. There's cameras everywhere that make sure you're not cheating, you're not on your cell phone, you're not looking at notes on your hands, you're not trying to copy what other people are doing, although the person right next to you could be doing an exam that has nothing to do with yours. They offer a multitude of exams. But the people that are responsible for administering the National Council licensure examination for registered nurse of Canada are going to be a bunch of Indians in a third-party business that literally asks for an ID. They're more concerned about you not cheating while you're there than they're concerned that you are the person that you're talking to, that you are the person that's supposed to be there. So you're telling me that this is a secure way to test nurses that are going to come here to Canada. Now, one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and this is the first question I've asked myself when I read this article earlier, is how many nurses lost their jobs because they refused to get vaccinated? I know them. I know some of them. I know doctors that lost their career over this. I know nurses that lost their career over this. I know police officers that lost their career over this. I lost my career as a sales engineer for not getting vaccinated. So I know what this is, and I know those people. Unfortunately, of course, there isn't, but there's no single national number for the number of nurses fired for not taking the vax. But as per the national estimate, True North estimates that nearly 10,000 unvaccinated healthcare workers across Canada were placed on unpaid leave or had their jobs terminated by health authorities. They don't know those numbers, and they definitely don't want you to know either. And Trevor, I can confirm those numbers. Trevor's talking about 7,400. I was seeing those numbers too. Now, I'm using the numbers I'm giving you there is all I can find. There's no exact numbers. Obviously, the government does not want those numbers out there, so they're never going to have the real numbers. But just to give you an example, we're talking about 10,000 unvaccinated healthcare workers. How many of them were nurses? We don't know. I could not find those numbers. But the point is that we fired nurses for not getting vaccinated, and now we're training nurses in India. Like, are you kidding me? Like, is this what Canada has become? The next question we need to ask ourselves is, what's the current nursing shortage in Canada? Canada has 320,000 plus registered nurses overall across country. Canada is projected to face a shortage of approximately 117,000 nurses by 2030, according to the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions and Health Canada, driven by retirements, burnouts, and an aging population. Nursing job vacancies have tripled in just 5 years across Canada, jumping from just over 13,000 to over 41,000 in 2023. Those are the nurses' job vacancy. For every 100 nurse under the age of 35 who registered to practice in Canada, 40 other young nurses did not renew their registration in 2023. Ontario's situation has worsened by 68% since 2014. So not only did we fire healthcare workers for not taking the vaccine, and now we're importing our nurses from India, but even the nurses that are trained here don't seem to be interested in staying in Canada. Yet the solution is to get more immigration in. The other question we need to ask ourselves is, are these programs really bringing the cream of the crop? The Manipal Academy of Higher Learning or Higher Education ranked top 3 nursing school in India. So it's not even number 1. It's top 3 in India, not in the world, not across the world, not half the world, in fucking India. Considered one of the most established nursing institutions in the country. Yeah, that means nothing. At the university level, the Manipal Academy of Higher Education ranked, this is terrible, it ranks between 851 and 900 globally. Ranked top 15 to 20 universities in India. Global ranking equals mid-tier, not elite. So we are bringing Indians that are going through a Canadian, I don't want to say inspired, but a program that is based for Canada in India, in one of the top 3 nursing college in India, ranked 15 to 20 university in India. So it's not even the best university in India. It's 15 to 20. We're talking about a third world fucking country here. These are the people that are going to come fix our healthcare system. Now, here's a comment, and that is exactly why. Thank you for saying this. At Sammy Cordavo is saying, who cares? I fucking care. And so should you. And here's why you should fucking care. Because the real question you should ask yourself is, why are we making deals with third world countries like India that don't share our culture instead of bringing people from European countries? You know, the people that built this country? Why are we not dealing with them instead of dealing with India? And I think we all know the answer. Well, Sammy probably doesn't know, but the answer is very simple, because we're being replaced. The Indian High Chancellor to Canada last month said on CBC that considering the size of our country, we should have at least 100 million people living in Canada, and India has the talent that we want and need. Also, this ties directly to the Century Initiative, co-founded by good friends of Mark Carney, the new Canadian ambassador to the US, Mark Wiseman. The initiative is about to bring the population of Canada to 100 million people by the end of the century. And if you look at our current immigration rate and policies, we are on the path of achieving just that by the end of this century. This is why you should care, because if you look at the numbers, our birth rate right now, if you look at regular Canadians, people that were born here or their parents were born here, you're looking at minus 1.2% in our birth rate. All our birth rate came from immigration. And if you know your history, a country that does not reproduce does not succeed. They do not continue to exist. And that is a fact. So when I tell you that we're being replaced, we're being replaced. In the past 25 years, Canada's population has grown by 30%. We went from the low 30s, the low 30 millions to over 41 million. All of it by immigration. And we are not talking about people that come from the US. We're not talking about people that come from Europe, but we're talking about people that come from third world country like India that represents 30% over the past few years of our immigration. So why do we keep catering? Why are we spending money on training Indians in India when we could be training people right here in Canada? Because remember, if you saw the new numbers for our youth unemployment rate, we're talking about 14 to 18%. 14 to 18% unemployment rates with our youth as we speak right now. And yet, I wanted to talk about this. I'm going to run out of time because we do have a guest that is joining us in 2 minutes. But I wanted to mention this, that there are 3 new immigration changes that took effect today that you need to know about. Higher passport fee. Of course, we're paying more taxes. It's going to go from $160 to $163.5. There are flexible super visa income requirement that I don't have the time to go through it. But the real thing is that Canada has announced that rural low wage cap increase on temporary foreign workers. So employers can now increase their workforce from 10% to 15% until next year, until March 31st, 2027. But to put it into perspective, out of the 41, we have 41 million citizens in Canada. There are currently around 3 million temporary residents in Canada who are allowed to work. This includes the temporary foreign worker program, the international mobility program, and of course, international students. There's more than 1 million of them that come here to study, and yet we give them work permit to make sure they can afford their study. Absolutely makes no sense. And if you look at the numbers, those are all the jobs that our youth normally gets. Like our Tim Hortons, you know the joke, our Tim Hortons have been replaced by Indians. You can't go to any Tim Hortons in Canada now and not see employees that are from Tim Hortons. They're subsidized. They pay half their fees and the other parts paid by the government. But the fact is that when I went back to school in my early 20s after being a drug addict, an alcoholic, a high school dropout, what type of experience do you think I had? I literally paid my college by working at Tim Hortons. I literally used to bake donuts in the back when they still made real donuts at Tim Hortons. This is how I paid for my studies. And today, foreign workers, foreign temporary workers are filling up those jobs. It's absolutely insane. Before we get to our guest, give me a thumbs up if you can hear us, Jeremy. You can hear me. You're ready to go. Thumbs up, double thumbs up. While he's not messing around. Before we get to Jeremy, though, we need to speak about our sponsor. And where's my sponsor announcement? Man, there it is. This episode of The Political Orphans is brought to you by Miss Cleo's Pet Treats, 100% natural, healthy dog treats, free from preservatives, additives, and fillers, made by hand right here in Canada. Not only are the treats handmade, but the meat is sourced locally from farm in Manitoba. So none of that nasty Chinese meat for your dog. Because if you know that your dog deserves better, go to Cleo's cookiesandtreats.ca and use the discount code Political Orphans to get 20% off your entire purchase. check the description below. The link, the discount code is right there. Now, for the discussion part of the show, we are joined by independent journalist Jeremy R. Hammond to speak about the war in Iran. Mr. Jeremy, bonjour.
How you doing? Good to see you again.
Yeah, my co-host is not here today, so I was going on a massive rant of 30 minutes about our immigration problems. So hopefully that was not that was still entertaining for you. But there's an echo, by the way, in your back. I think you have me on speaker, right?
Let me adjust. Okay, how do I sound?
Oh wow, so much better. Your voice is so much milkier now. Good for you. You have a good you have a good voice. So for the people out there that might not know Jeremy, we met for the first time last week. I record a podcast series with Vaccine Choice Canada called Safe and Effective question mark, as in we're kind of saying that it is not safe and effective. And Jeremy was a guest. We really hit it off. I really, really enjoyed our conversation last week. And as an independent journalist that specializes a lot, you did a lot of your work, at least on foreign policies, on foreign affairs. I reached out and said, are any of those topics something you can talk about? And one of the things that you're very knowledgeable on is the Iran American war. And this is quite a topic to speak about today. This is something we've talked about, but more of the energy lockdown portion, the conspiracy portion of things, the part that really is interesting to me. But for you to be an expert in this, I really want to take the time today to kind of break it down. What started this, not what they're telling us that started this, but what really started this, what is happening right now. And, I want you to keep that in mind. There's some of the reports that I'm saying that Iran will win that war, that it will become kind of a Vietnam situation where the US is going to have to quit at one point because it's going to be too expensive. So I want you to keep that in mind because I definitely want to talk about this. But can you break it down for us? If you had to explain the Iranian war right now, why the US is involved, why did they start bombing? We'll start right there.
Okay, well, sure. First, just to clarify, I don't consider myself an expert on the subject, but it is Iran and U.S. relations is something I've been watching for decades because I got started doing journalism, speaking out against the Iraq war and warning people that the government was lying about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction and operative ties to Al-Qaeda. I said that wasn't true. There's no evidence to support those claims. The government's lying. People didn't believe me. I turned out to be correct, of course. And very shortly after the Iraq war started, they started doing the same type of warmongering against Iran. Iran has been in the U.S. government sights for a long time, really ever since 1979. They like to start the history, when the warmongers talk about U.S.-Iran relations, they always start the history in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution and the hostages. But you need to go back to 1953 when the CIA and Britain's secret MI6 intelligence service orchestrated a coup to overthrow the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. And so that was one of the grievances of the Islamic Republic, of the Islamic Revolution. So you can start going back to, U.S. interference in Iran's internal affairs, going back to 1953. Prior to that, during World War II, Britain and Russia both invaded. The Soviet Union both invaded Iran. So there's a long history of foreign interference in Iran's internal affairs. And then, of course, you had during the 80s, the U.S. government was supporting Saddam Hussein in Iraq in its war against Iran, including the use of chemical weapons in Iran, which Iran did not use chemical weapons against Iraq, largely because the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had forbidden it, and just the way that he had also spoken out prohibiting the development of nuclear weapons. So on the question of the causes of this war, well, there's pretexts. There's what we're told were the reasons for the invasion. When Trump announced it early in the morning of February 28th, he cited three. One was that Iran supports terrorism, terrorist groups, which mainly refers to Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So there was the terrorism. The second one was that Iran oppresses its own people. And so we need to free the Iranian people from its own government, from their own government. And the third was Iran is developing nuclear weapons. Well, okay, let's take each of those in turn and assess the credibility of each of them. Well, does the U.S. government have a problem with terrorism? No. How do we know? Because the U.S. government is responsible for far worse criminal violence than any acts of terrorism by any groups that Iran is accused of supporting, including the U.S.-supported genocide in Gaza. The U.S. has a long history of allying with terrorist organizations, going back to the Soviet-Afghan War, when it was literally working alongside Osama bin Laden before he had created the Al-Qaeda group, the precursor organization to that, working right alongside Osama bin Laden out of Pakistan in the support of the Mujahideen, the so-called holy warriors, to supporting the Mujahideen against the Soviet occupation in Afghanistan, which was provoked by this U.S. government supporting these groups to provoke the Soviet invasion, according to Zbigniew Brzezinski. Which the plan was to give the Soviet Union their Vietnam, in his words. The U.S., of course, invasion of Iraq led to the rise of ISIS, the Islamic State. And then in Syria, the U.S. government sided with the radical extremist organizations, the Nusra Front, which was Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, and ISIS. It was funneling arms from Qatar and Saudi Arabia to the most violent extremist groups in Syria. And of course, so again, point being, the U.S. government sides with terrorists when it serves its geopolitical agenda, and it only has a problem with terrorism when it's their terrorism. Our terrorism is okay. So it can't possibly be that the U.S. opposes terrorism or criminal violence, because again, the U.S. government's criminal violence occurs on an incomparably greater scale, including this war, and not to mention the genocide again in Gaza. So we can forget that pretext. That's not the real reason. The second pretext was, well, the U.S. government is so concerned about the Iranian population. No, it's not. How do we know? Well, going back to January, there were protests against the economic situation in Iran, and of course, Israel and the U.S. government were supporting those and encouraging the street protests. And the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Bessent, bragged about how U.S. government policy had led to these protests and caused them. How? By imposing crippling sanctions on Iran that were targeted at the civilian population. The purpose was to collectively punish the civilian population of Iran in order. And they always have this idea that if they did the same thing in Iraq, when the sanctions against Iraq led to the deaths of 500,000 children, excess deaths. And when asked about that on 60 Minutes, Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, was asked, is the cost worth it? And she says, yeah, well, this is a very difficult thing, but we think the price is worth it. 500,000 dead children. They don't care about the people of these countries. Like, this is just another false pretext. So they impose these crippling sanctions to collectively punish the civilian population in some crazy hope that this was going to cause the people to rise up and overthrow the regime. Of course, that didn't happen because it never does. Sanctions don't accomplish that. There's studies on that. So we can forget that pretext.
So basically what you're saying, terrorism, the U.S. supports terrorism when it fits their agenda and complain when it doesn't. I think anybody that knows history can look at that and know that that's a fact. then you have, it's not because they oppress their people. You're not saying that Iranians, the leadership is not oppressing their people. You're saying that the
Right.
Americans don't care. That's
Right.
the difference. You're
No,
not saying
they
that
deliberately, Israel had Mossad operatives on the ground in Iran during the protests. The evidence indicates to fuel violence and supporting terrorist activities in Iran. Why? To provoke a harsher crackdown against the peaceful protesters, against all of the protesters. That was the purpose. And of course, the U.S. government was, working hand in hand with Israel in advance of this operation. So no, they don't care about the people. That's exactly right. And no, I'm not saying that the Iranian government isn't oppressive. Of course it is, but the U.S. government doesn't care about that.
yeah,
That's not the goal here. The
two
goal here
very.
isn't
I
to
just
free the.
wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that you clarified that for us. Yes, thank you. And it's the same with Iraq. It was Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? We were going to free the people of Iraq. Well, yeah, we freed them to death, didn't we? And then there's
I
the
shouldn't be
nuclear,
laughing. It's not funny. It's
the
not funny. I
nuclear
shouldn't be
claims.
laughing at that. Yep.
Yeah,
Same thing as Iraq. Same thing with Gaddafi. All
Yeah.
the same claims, right?
Yeah, it's the same. Of course, it's just routine, standard war propaganda. Is the point I'm getting at? It's just so routine, and like, why do people still fall for this stuff? It's the same thing every war. So the last one, that I mentioned, that Trump mentioned when he announced the war on the morning of February 28th, was that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. Well, his own intelligence community, since 2007, the intelligence community has assessed that Iran has no nuclear weapons program. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the agency that is tasked with monitoring member states of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which Iran was one of the original signatories of. And in fact, the U.S. government helped during the regime of the Shah, between the 1953 coup and the 1979 revolution. The U.S. government actually helped Iran to build its nuclear program. And the U.S. intelligence community, as I said, since 2007 has assessed that, contrary to all the warmongering claims, contrary to what Netanyahu has been saying for 30 years, Iran has no nuclear weapons program. The IAEA has assessed that it has no nuclear weapons program, although there are remaining questions that need to be answered about past activities. The IAEA has repeatedly, said that we don't see an active weapons program. And then, of course, back in last summer, Trump had bombed Iran with Israel, targeting the 3 nuclear sites, the 2 centrifuge facilities, and I forget what the third site purpose was. I think it's to basically take the yellow cake and to create uranium gas out of it, so that it can be enriched, I think is the purpose of the third facility there. But according to Trump himself, he, quote unquote, obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Well, okay, so if Iran's nuclear program was obliterated, how could it be possible that, fast forward to February 28th, and he's been claiming that, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks? Well, how is that possible if its nuclear program was obliterated? I mean, which version of Trump do you want to believe? Right? I mean, he's not even consistent with himself.
But it's not even just Trump. You can go back to Netanyahu. There's videos of him for the past 15, 20 years stating that within a matter of weeks, Iran will develop nuclear weapons. And you can love Israel, you can back Israel all you want. Those are facts. The videos are out there of Netanyahu saying within the next couple of weeks, Iran will develop nuclear weapons. We need to stop them. He's been saying this for decades. Yeah,
and I've been writing about it for decades. I mean, you can go back to some of my writings in the 2000s, where I'm, again, just writing against the warmongering claims, arguing against these claims that Iran was developing nuclear weapons, and citing the 2007 National Intelligence Estimate from the U.S. intelligence community, citing the IAEA, and this has been going on for decades. I mean, Iran is always supposedly, so many weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon. And there's just no evidence to support that. And the other thing about the whole nuclear weapons claim, that, the idea that, well, we have to bomb them, and wage war on Iran because of this threat of nuclear proliferation. Well, okay, they're failing to learn the lesson from the 1981 Israeli bombing of Iraq's Osirak reactor, which Israel claimed the justification for was, oh, they needed to prevent Iraq from developing a nuclear weapon. But that's not what it accomplished. Iraq was also a member of the NPT. Its nuclear program was under an inspections regime of the IAEA, and it had been, according to the IAEA, it had a legal nuclear program in full compliance. There was no evidence that Iraq had. Did I say Iran earlier? I meant Iraq. That Iraq had a nuclear weapons program. It was Israel's bombing of the Osirak reactor that prompted Saddam Hussein to decide to try to develop nuclear weapons as a deterrent to any further Israeli aggression. Well, if anything, all that this war is going to accomplish is to reverse the policy of Iran to not develop nuclear weapons. And if anything causes them to change their minds about that and start developing nuclear weapons, it will be this war. Why? Well, to deter any further U.S. or Israeli aggression. So, they're completely undermining the entire non-proliferation framework. So, the idea that this war is about non-proliferation of nuclear arms is completely ludicrous, because they're completely undermining the entire treaty framework and pushing Iran in that direction. So that's not what this war is about either. So these are all false pretexts. And we can speculate about what the real reasons are.
That's what I want to hear. Oh, yeah. I'm letting you open that one. Go for it.
Okay. Well, Israel, of course, has its own motive, which is that Iran is an obstacle to its continued takeover of more Palestinian land and expulsion or extermination of the people of Palestine, as well as continued takeover. We're seeing right now Israel invading Lebanon and taking over land there. It's got land grabbing in Syria. Israel wants land, and Israel was created by ethnically cleansing most of the Arab population of Palestine to take the land and expel its inhabitants. So Israel has its own motive, which is to just try to weaken Iran and to weaken its support for Hezbollah, for Hamas, and basically trying to establish some kind of like deterrence against Iranian support for these groups and for the Palestinian cause. The U.S. government has a different agenda. Well, partly overlapping, of course. The U.S. supports Israel and it supports its political and geopolitical aims. But I think in my assessment, we can kind of figure out what Trump was thinking by looking at what was happening. Well, back last summer, there were negotiations about Iran's nuclear program because, of course, Trump removed the U.S. from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA agreement, that Obama had, under the Obama administration, had negotiated with the Iranian government, which was a very strict regime under the IAEA, that was under an IAEA inspections regime that very strictly limited the amount of the level at which Iran would enrich uranium and also how much it could stockpile. And Trump violated that agreement, reimposed crippling sanctions. So why would he do that? Well, because in Trump's view, Iran shouldn't be allowed to enrich any uranium. And this was what during last summer's Operation Midnight Hammer, the joint U.S.-Israeli operation against Iran, the bombing of the nuclear facilities, Iran was again in negotiations, and they used the negotiations to just bomb Iran. So what does that tell you about how you can trust the Trump administration to negotiate on good faith? Same thing happened here. Going back to February, Iran was negotiating. There were negotiations ongoing about Iran's nuclear program. And according to the foreign minister of Oman, who was the mediator in these talks, Iran had agreed actually to something it had never agreed to before, which is to allow zero stockpiling of enriched uranium, zero stockpiling. So it wouldn't hold any enriched uranium in the country. So Iran was negotiating in good faith. Trump was not. Instead of continuing these negotiations, which were having fruit, Trump just issued an ultimatum threatening Iran, saying, like, no, you don't get to enrich uranium at all, even though under the NPT treaty, the right of countries to enrich uranium for civilian purposes, including, of course, nuclear energy, is inalienable. That's in the NPT treaty. And so Iran is just refusing to surrender its right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Trump says, no, you can't have that right. That's what this has been about. And so as far as Trump is concerned, Iran is just being disobedient. It's not obeying. He gave them an order. No, you must accept zero enrichment, not just zero stockpiling, but also zero enrichment. And if you don't surrender your right under the treaty to enrich uranium, I'm going to bomb you. That's what he said. And so that's what this is about. In my analysis, it's mainly that Iran is, and this isn't just Trump. I mean, you can go back in U.S. history and the history of, what some people call an empire. That, the U.S., there's U.S. global hegemony happening here, where any states that disobey orders from Washington are considered rogue states, right? And so that can't be allowed. Nations cannot be allowed to act independently and to exercise their rights. If it goes against Washington's wishes, they have to be put down. You have to be taught a lesson. And so Trump is trying to teach Iran a lesson about disobedience, essentially, because Iran refused to surrender its right to enrich uranium. And so that is really, and there's, we can speculate all kinds of other additional reasons, but to me, that's the main core issue, is that Iran was being disobedient. And so Trump wanted to teach Iran a lesson, and he thought he could. And I think he grossly, seriously miscalculated. And of course,
ego. So ego.
Yeah, sure. It's hubris for sure. And, the narcissist in chief got it in his head that he could teach him a lesson, and Iran has been defiant and frankly, really holding out really well in this war. And if anything, the U.S. has not been faring well. The U.S. and Israel. I mean, Iran has showed them that if you guys want to attack our oil facilities, guess what? We can attack oil facilities in the countries hosting your bases. We can attack Israel. We can attack Tel Aviv. We can launch missiles at your Dimona nuclear reactor in Israel, right? So every time the U.S. government and Israel launch an attack on Iranian infrastructure, Iran retaliates right back and shows them, like, listen, if you guys want to escalate, we can escalate too. So how about you just calm down a little bit? I mean, that's the message that Iran has been giving, and successfully. It started out militarily, firing lower quality, older missiles and drones, cheaper drones, and causing the interceptors from Israel and the Gulf states. They're having to fire all these interceptors, which are very, very expensive. So cost-wise, Iran was doing very well. And then it started coming out with its more advanced weaponry, while the interceptors had been depleted. It's maintained control of the Strait of Hormuz, whereas shipping of oil for any states aligned with U.S. and Israel have been virtually halted. Iran is still shipping oil out of the Gulf. In fact, I think it's even more oil is being shipped than previously, is what I've read. I haven't verified that, but I believe that to be true. And so in countries, China is able to buy Iranian oil, but Gulf countries aren't able to export. And this also ties into, of course, to the U.S. dollar hegemony and the petrodollar system, whereby the Gulf Cooperative Council states, the GCC states, which is generally the states there in the Gulf region where the U.S. has its military bases, they sell oil for U.S. dollars, and then recycle those dollars back into the U.S. economy, whether through arms purchases to support the military-industrial complex, or purchases of U.S. treasuries. This helps keep interest rates low. It helps the U.S. government finance its debt. And so this recycling of U.S. dollars, this is what's called the petrodollar system, which essentially helps the U.S. to maintain its dollar hegemony, with the dollar as the world reserve currency, and also, again, helps the government to finance its debt by keeping interest rates low, which of course enables it to engage in all of this spending, just as the Federal Reserve's purchase of U.S. debt and monetization of U.S. debt by purchasing government treasuries with dollars literally created out of thin air, of course, pushes interest rates artificially low, helps U.S. government maintain its debt, which of course, just the interest on the debt, if interest rates were to rise, the U.S. government can't even pay the interest on its debt, much less the principal.
And if
so
you
the
look at
petrodollar
what
system
happened,
is
but
important.
Gaddafi, it was the same thing with Gaddafi, what you're talking about. What people believe the reason is the US killed Gaddafi is because he was going to introduce the African dinar,
Mm.
and the oil coming out of that region would only deal in gold backed dinar, and they would refuse the US dollar as the petrodollar.
Mhm.
And that's the reason why people, at least behind closed doors, the conspiracies out there, or why they assassinated Gaddafi, is
I
because
think
he
that's a
was
key
going to
reason.
take that.
Yeah, he did have
Yeah,
plans to it. Yep.
so it's easy to see that could be a possibility in Iran as well. Although, there's a question I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about Israel, and it's one of those things. I don't normally tend to talk a lot about international conflicts, especially in the Middle East, because at the end of the day, my country, Canada, is so damaged right now that I focus on what can I do to help. I want people. I would not participate in any foreign activity whatsoever. If it was up to me, zero. Fix your problem. Fix yourself before you start helping other people. But what do you say to the people out there that when they look at conflicts in the Middle East, they look at Israel, and they look at all the Muslim countries out there? We have a very good idea of what they stand for in Canada. We have a lot of Muslim population that we let take over, and we have a two-tier system of justice here in Canada. If you're an immigrant, you're treated a lot better than the Canadians that built this country, and this is something we see every day. And it's easy for me to look at Israel and say, you know what, I agree with Israel more in culture. I might not agree with everything that they do. I think that everybody's at fault. When it comes to war, we're all at fault. We never win. But it's always going to happen. War is a fact. It's part of our nature. But what do you say to the people out there that look at conflicts in the Middle East and they're siding with Israel just because culturally we align? And I personally don't align with Muslims. I don't. I'm a Christian. My religion does not align. I will respect you for being a human being, but I fully understand that Islam is a political religion. It has invaded countries by the ballot instead of the bullet, like they used to do, and that's what we're seeing all over the West. So what do you say to the people that will always back Israel over any Muslim country because culturally we align?
Yeah, that's a huge factor. I mean, just in the U.S., in Americans. I mean, I'm in the U.S. I'm an American. You're in Canada, but here in America, it's such a huge factor that there's this cultural alignment.
Yeah.
Israel is considered a Western country, right? Even though it's in the Middle East, it's just considered part of the West. And of course, you have a lot of cultural, alignment between Christians and Jews, both being, people of the book, as Muslims would say, because of course in the Quran, that's how Jews and Christians are both described, that they're people of the book, meaning the Hebrew scriptures that Jews believe in, the Hebrew Tanakh, or what Christians call the Old Testament, and of course Christians also having the scriptures of the New Testament and the Gospels. And so there's just this, I was raised Christian and kind of grew up, going to church, going to Sunday school, and there's just this sense, this idea that, oh, well, we must support Israel no matter what. And this stems from this belief that, the Jews were God's chosen people. And there's these prophecies of, the Israel being restored. And I don't want to get into biblical interpretation here, but it is such a huge factor that people, even non-Christians, whether you're Christians, non-Christians, there's just a cultural alignment with Israel. And I think that blinds people. I think people have confirmation biases, and so they're more willing to just believe whatever they want to believe about Israel and U.S. support for it and its actions, whereas they're willing to accept whatever evils are attributed to the other, to them, this us versus them mentality. My personal view is, I want to get along with everyone. And if you look at the history of Palestine pre-Zionism, the Jewish communities, the indigenous Jewish community, and the Christians and the Arabs, or the Muslims, because there were Christian Arabs as well as Muslim Arabs, they all had friendly relations in Palestine before the Zionist movement. And the outbreaks of violence that occurred during the Mandate era after World War I it wasn't anti-Semitism that was driving like Arab riots, and there was outbreaks of violence in 1920, 1921, 1928. It was in the British investigations and their own commissions of inquiry into the causes of the outbreaks of violence concluded that there's no inherent anti-Semitism in the country. It was anti-Zionism. And we could get into that whole history, but my fundamental principle is this. I mean, hey, I like to live according to the golden rule. If I might not consider myself a Christian, but I do consider myself a disciple of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. And I believe in the golden rule, and translated into a political philosophy, that's the principle of non-aggression. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and don't do unto others what you wouldn't have them do unto you. And I don't care what your religion is, what your color is, what your ethnicity is, what your race is. I mean, we can all get along as human beings. I'm just a citizen of this planet. And so I think there's just too much divisiveness in terms of, well, you have a different belief system than I do, so I don't like you. You know what I mean? And this is a cause of a lot of the enablement of criminal organizations called governments to perpetrate criminal violence.
Let me push back on what you're saying right now, because this is something that we talk about all the time, and I'm curious to know your opinion, because we don't really know each other. But I push back on people, especially on this. Do you honestly believe that a Christian culture like what we have in North America, what it was based on, and I will not say Judo-Christian values, it was Christian values. I don't know why we always connect Judeo and Christians together. There's still Jews that killed my God. So we're not, yes, we break religion, we have the same Old Testament, but at the end of the day, the West was not built by Jewish people, it was built by Christians. But do you honestly believe that Christians and Muslims can get along under Muslim rule?
Well, it depends on what Muslim rule means, but I think, well, we've seen Christians and Muslims and Jews all get along in Palestine pre-Zionism. It's certainly possible. There's nothing inherently I don't see any reason for like inherent conflict between peoples just because they have different religious beliefs. Again, the Quran refers to Jews and Christians both as people of the book. As to why we have this Judeo-Christian phrase and term, well, because because Christianity has Hebrew roots. I mean, the Old Testament is a Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's called the Tanakh. That's the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, which is what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. And of course, Jesus himself was Jewish. So I think that's I think that's why there's a sense of Judeo-Christian culture and a belief system. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I absolutely believe people can get along. The problem
No,
is,
but hold on.
the
How
problem is you
can
have
you get
radical extremists who claim to
well?
be.
The radical extremists are not corrected by their own people, and that's the problem. And this is exactly where I'm going with this.
Mhm.
If Christians were taking over countries, I would have a problem with that because that is not part of Christianity. But if you read the Quran, it is part of their religion to spread their religion by any means necessary. It is okay to kill, it is okay to lie. There's nothing in the in my Bible that says that it's okay for me to do that. So I believe in self-defense.
I would
Obviously,
dispute that. I've read the Quran and don't believe it says that, but I would be happy to be corrected if someone could point me out a passage. But
the point in the matter is
but
that
people might have those interpretations, but people also interpret the Bible to justify all kinds of violence and criminality. So this is the
right
problem as
now,
far as I can see it.
but right now, as we speak, Christians are not invading other people's country and taking over and trying to establish
we're attacking
rule
Iran right now. Not we, not me.
No, but those are not Christians. Our countries are not, unfortunately, they're not Christian anymore, and they're not ruled by Christian values anymore. There's still Christians in there.
Yeah, okay.
But they're not ruled by Christian values anymore, and that is my main problem. Personally, as a Christian, that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing. But I do not believe that Christians and Muslims can get along unless it is a country based on Christian values. You know, I got a lot of friends that are atheists, and they're like, the only country I want to live in is a cultural Christian country. Like what, Canada? Because you call it cultural, we're not Christians, but culturally we're somewhat still Christian, and that is the type of place where everything's accepted. But you cannot go to the Middle East. I cannot go as a Christian to the Middle East and live my religion the way that I would do here, the way that we accept Muslim to live their religion here. And that's my point. And I'm not saying this like it's a bad thing or it's a good thing. I'm just saying some cultures don't align, and it's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have any problem with a culture that doesn't fit with my culture. But that also means that I don't want their culture anywhere close to my culture if it don't mix. Do you know what I mean? And this is my bigger problem, is not saying that Muslims shouldn't exist. I don't really care if they exist or not. At the end of the day, I don't care. But I have the right to say that I don't want them close to my culture because their culture does not match my culture, and it is not my responsibility to change my way of life in order to cater to foreigners that are here to change my culture into their culture when there's 50, 60 other countries in the world that they can go to that live under a similar rule. But they never go to those countries. They always go to the countries that are in the West that are accepting that. And that's the point I'm trying to make. And that to me is not racist. That to me is not, there's nothing wrong with admitting that some cultures don't match. Because like I said earlier, I find it interesting for you to speak about what's going on in Iran. I might not agree with your views, but that's okay. Like, this is what the show's all about. I let people talk, agree or disagree. It's fine. The whole point's to be able to have that conversation. But we also have to be able to have the hard conversations where we say that some cultures don't mix, and it's okay. I don't go to, I love Japan. One of my favorite, I'm a big fan of the Japanese culture, and I cannot wait to visit it one day. I've never been, but I've been following it since I can remember, since I've been a child. But you know what I would do if I go to Japan? I'd respect their culture. I would live under their culture because I'm a foreigner. I'm just a guest in their house. I'm not going to wear my shoes on the couch. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple rule. I just don't understand why we don't respect ourselves enough to set boundaries. And you're seeing it in the US. Even in the US, you look at what's happening to New York right now. I'm like, wow, I could have predicted that. That was pretty simple. I predicted that last year when they started talking about this. But as much as I appreciate this, because we're running out of time, that's why I'm trying to cut it short a bit. Like I only had you for half an hour. It looks like we might need more time next time. But I appreciate your knowledge on what's going on overseas. I always come back to the same thing. I just want Canada to be taken care of. Can you imagine if the US just minded their own business and just took care of the US? how different your country would be.
We'd be
Same thing
better off.
for oh, yep. And but at the same time, it is not. I also believe that it is not my responsibility. I'm speaking about Canada, to have a bunch of people show up here that don't align with my culture. It's not my responsibility to take care of them. It's not my responsibility to be accepting. So we need to stop mindling in other people's business and take care of our own. I don't think that there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Well, yeah, we ought the U.S. government ought to stop interfering in other countries' internal affairs, certainly, and also, stop the criminal violence against other countries. I mean, if I can just have a moment to make one point, because I believe, if I understood you correctly, that you were agreeing that people of different religions, Muslims, Christians, whatever, can get along and have peaceful, friendly relations if they have a government that is based on certain, if the country has certain values, which I kind of interpret as having the right type of government.
I'll say it plainly. Any religion can live in a Christian country. Not any religion outside of Muslims can live in a Muslim country. And we're not talking a culturally Muslim country like the UAE, for example. It's Muslim country, but it's not really a Muslim country, just like Canada is not really a Christian country anymore. So it's culture, right? Culture versus the actual religion itself. But if you're looking at religion itself, I cannot live under a Muslim country. But Muslims can live under a Christian country. So is it possible for religions to get along? Absolutely. But it depends who's in power.
Yeah. Okay. And I would agree that, given a government that has rule of law, that people can get along. I think the problem comes when governments are lawless, and then of course, and I wouldn't say that like Islamic governments represent Islam or the Muslim religion, and so I think there's a problem there in terms of equating a religion with like the regime, for example. But that's kind of a whole other discussion. But yeah, I just wanted to get clarity on your thought there.
But it's not because of what I was saying earlier. If who is dictating the policies? Is it extremism? Okay, there's extreme in any movement. Right. Some movements are so extreme that the left and the right touch. It's just there's no difference between the extreme left and the extreme right. They're basically the same type of people no matter what. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you allow the extremists of your party, of your country, to do as they please without calling them out, you are as responsible as they are because you're allowing it to happen. If Christians went around and started killing people or starting doing things that are illegal, that are not only illegal but immoral, because some laws are immoral and shouldn't be respected, in my opinion. But if Christians went around and been immoral, forcing others to do what they don't want to do, I'd have a problem with it, and I'd be the first one. I have a big problem with the Christian community for being too lukewarm. I can't find a church where I have any respect for the preacher because they don't have the balls to talk about the real stuff. They want to make their congregation happy by making them feel good. Sorry, bruh, read your Bible, because if you read the Bible and you feel good afterwards, you're not paying attention. You're really not paying attention to what it's telling you. And that's my problem, is you have a lot of extremists within the Muslim society, and they're accepted and they're scary, so people leave them alone.
Well, I agree with that. I'll push back a little bit because I see plenty of Jewish extremism and Christian extremism as well. Pete Hegseth being an example, the Department of War, and him giving prayers and praying for death and destruction in this war against Iran, which is illegal. I mean, it's a violation of the U.S. Constitution. It's a violation of international law. I mean, that's an example of Christian extremism. You have Christian extremists who would like to help Jewish extremists in Israel to obtain a red heifer so that they can sacrifice the heifer for the purification ritual to be able to return to the Temple Mount and destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and rebuild the Third Temple. I mean, this is extremism. So I don't think it's a case where you have Muslim extremism and then, wonderful Christianity. And I'm not trying to slam Christian beliefs, but
in
again,
Canada, yes,
there's a difference between like the teachings of Jesus and how Christians behave and act.
I,
And yeah,
I agree, but the point I'm trying to make is that I don't tell other people what to do in their own country.
yeah,
That's the point I'm trying to make. I
yeah.
don't
Okay,
as
sure.
much. That's the difference. I'm not in another person's country try to put my values on top of theirs because mine are better than theirs. I'm talking about my country here in Canada. I want I their values don't align with mine, and it's okay. There's plenty of other places that they can go where their values align with theirs. I just don't want to be part of changing the culture that I don't even recognize anymore, personally. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
it's
on
a kind of
that, I mean, me being here in the U.S., I'm white. My ancestry comes from Europe, and we pushed out cultures. I mean, the area that I live in, the indigenous tribes were like the Odawa, Chippewa, and the Odawa managed to stay in this location here in Michigan because they were forced to basically give up their own culture, right? And so, I mean, this cultures shift all the time. I mean, you're always going to have immigration. You're always going to have people traveling. The United States is a country that was built on immigration and mixtures of cultures. And I don't have any problem with people from other countries moving into the United States, or as long as I think people should enter the U.S. legally, just like my wife did. My wife's Taiwanese, and she entered. We went through the immigration process and then the nationalization process. But I think that it's just kind of a fact of history that you have mixtures of you have movement of peoples and mixtures of cultures, and I think we need to do our best to get along. And yes, of course, nobody should try to force their beliefs on other people, and we certainly agree about that. But I guess my point is that I guess I have more faith in the ability of people to get along, maybe, than you do.
Well, the thing is that there is a difference between being conquered, like what we did to natives. We conquered them, and openly inviting the people to conquer you. I guarantee you that natives did not understand what was going on. They got conquered.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like there's incentives, like California incentivizing illegal immigration, and then giving them like social security numbers and things like this. So, and of course, these are horrible, ridiculous, stupid policies.
Being invaded and conquered because it's a superior force is one thing. Openly inviting the people that want what's yours, aka what the Romans did when they didn't feel like defending themselves anymore and hired outsiders to take care of them, that's pretty fucking stupid. But there's a difference. If you're strong and ideology makes you weak, there's a problem. That's not what we're seeing that's not what happened to the natives. They got conquered by a superior force. That again, story of the world. That happened. It will continue to happen. But that doesn't mean that we need to be stupid and allow people to take over, willingly letting them take over. That's my problem.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with what's happening in Canada. I can only speak for the U.S. really.
Yeah.
And particularly my state of Michigan, that's just not a concern here. Maybe if I lived on the southern border, I would have a different understanding of the situation. But yeah, it's not a concern of mine where I live specifically. But I can understand many people being concerned. I mean, you have criminal gangs coming across the border. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, that's a concern, and when it's incentivized. But like my solution to that would be like, okay, well, end the drug war, the so-called war on drugs, like decriminalize drugs, legalize it. And that would overnight eliminate all of these criminal organizations. And of course, one of the biggest criminal organizations is probably the CIA, which has a history of funding itself covertly through the drugs trade. But I think that would be one of the why are people fleeing across the border north to the United States? You have these criminal gangs down in Mexico and in Latin America, South America. That's one of the big problems. But if you just eliminated the need for a black market, then it would solve one of the big problems. But I just have different ideas about how we can solve these problems, I think, than most people. Because like the idea of just like building a wall across the border is one thing, but I think we can find better solutions where anyone who, and I also believe in freedom of movement, right? I mean, I think people have a right to travel and a right to have to move, but of course that doesn't mean I'm in favor of people like illegal immigration. And I think it needs to be done properly and through the legal process. And I don't think borders should exist in the first place, to be frank, because I'm against. I oppose the institution of statehood. I don't believe in it. I am an anarchist. I believe that we ought to have.
You are opening a can of worms that we do not have time to address.
No, I know.
that is, I gotta tell you, that is a very assly move to do that at the end of a show where we can't explore it. That's bullshit.
Sorry.
That is so, there's so much wrong in what you said, and I don't even get to address it. It's gonna be a conversation for another day, but I love those philosophical conversation, because obviously there's always going to be statehood. There's always going to be statehood. So but yeah.
Well, listen, if we ever hope to achieve a civilized society, that has to end. That has to change. We will never have a civilized society as long as it's based on the idea of force and aggression, as opposed to nonviolence and the non-aggression principle. I want to create a society based on the non-aggression principle. In other words, the golden rule. If we can build a society around that, there's peace and prosperity.
Yeah, that's a utopia that unfortunately will never happen. I don't think that's human nature right there.
If we don't believe in it, we'll never make it happen. I believe our choices determine the future.
Listen, our choice definitely define the future, but we cannot be ignorant of human nature at the same time too. We are flawed from the get-go.
Yes,
we are definitely flawed.
The politicians that people choose to rule over them are no less flawed, and usually more flawed. So this idea that we ought to like have them ruling over us, to me, is just, that's what's ridiculous to me.
The word choose is not the word I would use. More selected is the word that I would choose when it comes to politicians. They're not chosen, they're selected. George Carlin said it for decades. If voting mattered, we wouldn't be allowed to do it. And I strongly believe in that. That's why, to me, it was interesting for me to hear what you thought the Iranian war is all about. To me, it's all about control, and it's just bread and circuses for the masses in order to bring in the 15-minute cities, the digital IDs, and the massive control over the population by one government that is a few people sitting around a table that can control us all through AI. That is what I believe. But I appreciate your time, Jeremy. Thank you for coming on. It was nice talking to you. As much, again, I don't have to agree to like people, to like talking to them. So I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll do it again. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. Hopefully,
yeah.
I know the comments went on and on and on. There were some good ones, there were some bad ones, but that's the type of conversation that we have here. So hey, thanks for doing it, man.
It's good to be able to disagree respectfully, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah,
and it seemed like we agreed 100% on the last time we talked on the other issue. On this one, I think we had lots of common ground. I think it's important to find the common ground and then go from there. So I appreciate the conversation.
But I told you, I had a feeling this would happen. I had a feeling I would disagree with a lot of things you had to say, even though when it comes to big pharma, we seem to be 100% aligned on big pharma and vaccinations. So, but that's a good base. That's a good base to start. We know that we agree on something, and we can go on from there. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for doing this. We'll have to do it again.
Well, thanks for having me on again, and I'd love to come back on and continue our conversations.
Have a good day, man.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. So guys, there you are. We went 20, 25 minutes over. It is what it is. That's what we do here. So guys, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully, even if you didn't agree with Jeremy, because clearly there's a lot of things that he said I didn't agree with him. But that's the same thing happens with my co-host Rob Ambrose when he's here. I don't agree with everything that he says either, but that's the whole point of the show. At the end of the day, we need to be able to have those conversations. We need to be able to disagree and have those hard conversations, because that's what's missing today. It seems that if you disagree with somebody, they're automatically an enemy. They're automatically entitled to your insults because you don't agree. And this is not what the show's about. And we don't move forward if this is how we see the world. If we're not able to have conversations with the people that we are not supposed to get along with, well, we got some problems, and the problems we're facing them right now as we speak. On that note, starting today, I didn't speak about this, but I'm announcing it today. I started a community on bringing up the next leadership of Canada. And I'm not talking about politicians, because the last thing we need is more politicians. What we need is more leaders that are ready to change their community, one community at a time, people that want to get involved in their cities. So I created a community on school, and you can check in the description below. I will put all the information there. But the whole point is to put a space together where we are able to speak about the real problems facing Canada, but stop complaining. We need to find solutions, and we need to find solutions together. And I don't claim to have all the solutions, because I definitely don't. But I know for a fact that if we put enough smart people in the same room, we will eventually find those solutions. But more importantly, we need to find ways to implement those solutions, because the Canada that we are living in today is not the Canada I grew up in. It's not the Canada I want to leave to my kids. So we definitely need to do something. And unlike a lot of people, I don't think it's too late for Canada. I think that all we need is for good people to stand up and say enough. So if you are interested in knowing more about the community that I built, go visit thepoliorphans.com. ThePoliorphans.com. The link's going to be in the description below. And join us. On that note, we're Wednesday. We have one more show for this week. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Hopefully my co-host will be there. But join us tomorrow, 7 p.m. We have a guest in Tracy Wilson, the VP of Communications for the CCFR. We're going to be talking guns at 7:30, because the gun grab in Canada entered a different phase as of today. You can no longer get paid for firearms if you did not register them. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. We're also going to talk about their case that they have in front of the Supreme Court, because I've been getting a lot of questions as to when are they going to be heard in the Supreme Court. Because if they are heard, actually when they are heard, should I say, because it's already been agreed to, they could literally put a stop to the gun grab. And that is one of the amendments that they're going to be asking. That's one of their things that they're going to be asking, is until the ruling is done on their case in front of the Supreme Court that is challenging the Trudeau government's ban of 2,500 firearm types and models overnight without discussion in the parliament. As soon as those discussions are open, they want to put the gun grab on a hold until it is resolved, because it does take a lot of time to run things through the Supreme Court. So we're going to be talking about this tomorrow. And if you are first joining us for the first time, make sure to like, make sure to comment, because we're all about comments here. We want to hear what you have to say. Good, bad, I want to hear it. And make sure to subscribe. Until tomorrow, I will wish you a good night, and I will see you 7 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday. Peace.